So this video will take you through the Rogerian argument structure, one of the three argument structures that we're talking about at the beginning of the semester as a way of helping us to break down and analyze arguments of our own. So to begin with, let's just do a quick review. We talked on Wednesday about the Aristotelian argument structure, which emphasizes the rhetorical relationship of the rhetorical triangle. So remember, this is the relationship between the writer and the audience. And basically for Aristotle, the goal of the writer is to persuade the audience by attacking or refuting the opponent's arguments. And we talked a little bit about the idea of a toolbox of rhetorical strategies, in particular logos, pathos, ethos, and kairos. So these are all rhetorical tools that the writer can use to convince the audience to agree with his argument. So quick review question: which rhetorical strategy did Aristotle think was the most important? The answer to that is ethos. Remember that Aristotle finds the author's credibility, his knowledge, his ability as an arguer to be the most important tool for convincing the audience. And this is going to be very important when we think about the other two types of argument structures, the Rogerian and the Toulmin models, because they are going to think that other rhetorical strategies are the most important. So let's talk a little bit about the Rogerian model. The Rogerian model was created by Carl Rogers. He was a 20th century humanistic psychologist who applied aspects of personal therapy to communication therapy. So basically, he took some of the tools that are used in counseling or personal therapy and applied them to communication. So basically what Rogers does is he advocates empathetic listening. So listening with a goal of understanding and relating emotionally to the person who's speaking. And he wants to use this as a tool for solving problems, both personal problems and controversial issues. And so his theory is that active listening can not only solve problems between individuals, but also between groups and nations. That if we can only listen carefully to the other person, we might be able to relate to that person and work together to solve the problem. So let's talk a little bit about Rogers' approach. He theorized that individuals who learn to listen to each other and to empathize with other people can more effectively problem solve. So let's stop to think for a second about the idea of empathy. A lot of times we equate this idea with sympathy, that I might feel sympathetic or sorry for someone and therefore I might relate to them a little bit better. But empathy is even more strong. It doesn't mean that we just feel sorry for someone. It means that we actually try to identify with their feelings, that we work to really understand and even maybe experience what that other person is feeling. And so in order to do this, we have to be able to communicate effectively. We have to be able to listen carefully to other people. We have to work to really understand what the other person's position or side is. And that communication has to be non-confrontational and mutual. In other words, we can't be aggressive as we're dealing with the other person. We have to be able to listen and step back and to really think about things. And the communication must happen between both sides, both parties. It can't just be one person. In addition, he asserted that one of the reasons we have a really hard time solving problems in the modern world is that we don't have a shared worldview anymore. So one of the things that made Aristotelian rhetoric possible for a long time as a very strong method of argumentation is that at the time, the people that Aristotle was arguing to, or making arguments to, or people who were using the Aristotelian model held a shared worldview. They basically agreed on the way the world looked. They shared lots of things in common, and so they had a similar way of looking at the world. But this isn't really true any longer. We have people with so many backgrounds, there's so much diversity in the world, that there's really not one shared way of looking at the world. There are many different, diverse ways of looking at the world. And so that makes it very difficult to problem solve. If you share a worldview, if you share or agree upon the way the world looks, it's much easier to solve problems. But we don't really have that very much in the modern world. So the Rogerian approach seeks to find something called common ground. This is basically something that the two sides can agree upon. It's something that the two sides both value. And so when you can agree that you value the same thing, you can better work together to solve conflicts because you are working together to promote that common ground. In addition, with the Rogerian model, you really work to find a consensus instead of a compromise. Keep in mind that with a compromise, both sides are giving something up, and they probably won't be very happy about that compromise. They won't be very happy about what they've had to give up to achieve a solution. A consensus is a little bit different. It implies more agreement. So you have to really come to some kind of an agreement about that common ground and work together to move forward. You're not necessarily giving up as much with a consensus. So let's talk a little bit about the argument structure. Keep in mind that the Rogerian model, unlike the Aristotelian model, emphasizes the positional and referential relationships, not the rhetorical relationship as we had with the Aristotelian model. So the Rogerian model really tries to find common ground between the way that the audience and the writer feel about the subject that they're talking about. Keep in mind that with this type of model, your thesis is going to basically be the common ground. You're basically going to be thinking about what the two sides have in common and how they can potentially reconcile their conflicts. So here's a good example. We talk a lot about standardized school testing when we think about educational issues. And if we look at what the two sides of this controversy have in common, we might be able to write a Rogerian argument or to make a Rogerian argument that moves forward to promote that common ground. So on the one side, people who oppose standardized school testing might argue that these tests take away from teaching critical thinking because most of these tests just involve rote memorization of information. They also might argue that these tests put too much pressure on teachers, students, and schools to perform in a certain way. And especially since funding is tied to student performance, this can often put a lot of stress on teachers and schools to produce results. Those people who support standardized school testing might argue that schools have to have a way to assess whether students are learning. We have to have a way of figuring out how much students are learning and what they still don't know. And we also have to be able to measure learning between school systems. So if we're trying to compare school systems and to figure out which school system is strong and which is weak, one way we can do this is by looking at standardized test scores. So these are very opposing views when we think about whether standardized school testing should still occur. But if we look at the common ground, we see that both sides are really valuing the same thing. Both sides want to promote student learning and student success. They just disagree about the way that they can do that. So keep in mind that if we were working to write a Rogerian argument about something like standardized school testing, that we're looking for what both sides value. We're looking what they both hold in common or share, and that will be the common ground that can move us forward toward a solution. So the Rogerian argument structure has 5 basic steps. It's a fairly simple model that you sort of follow this 5-step structure and you can create a clear Rogerian argument. So the first step is to give an objective statement of the issue under discussion. So you basically give a short introduction to what it is that you're addressing in the argument. The second step is to summarize the opposition's case. So in very impartial, objective language, you talk about what you think the opposition believes. Part of the goal of this summary is to demonstrate that empathy that we talked about before, that you have listened or you've researched the opposing side and you understand what it is the opposition believes. The third step then is to make a statement about your own side of the issue. What are your concerns? What are your interests? Why do you believe the way you believe? But one of the things you have to do is avoid loaded language that can be too aggressive. You have to avoid sounding morally superior. Again, you're trying to be as objective as possible so that you can demonstrate that goal of a consensus. Step 4 then is to talk about that common ground. What do both sides of the controversy have in common? What concerns do you share? That is basically your thesis statement. What do the two sides agree on? You also at this stage might need to talk about any kind of irreconcilable differences. Are there things that the two sides absolutely can never agree on? And what are they? At that point, you need to admit that there might be some differences that would make a consensus very difficult or even impossible. And then finally, step 5, you want to talk about your proposed solution. And it's very important in this step of the argument structure that you point out what both sides will gain. How will both sides of the controversy actually benefit from your proposed solution? So let's talk a little bit about the argument structure essay that you guys read on pages 20 and 22 in the argument textbook, Katie Couric and the Celebrity Medicine Syndrome. So first step is to sort of evaluate the ethos of the author. The book tells you that Julia Belluz is a health journalist and a journalism fellow at MIT, and that Stephen Hoffman is an assistant professor of science at McMaster University and the Harvard School of Public Health. This is an article that appeared in the LA Times, which is quite a reliable journalistic source. So we definitely see that these two authors have ethos. They are both reliable sources. They've published in a reliable source. And within the essay itself, they tell you that Hoffman, one of the authors, actually completed a review of research that talks about the issue at hand. So let's talk about the two opposing sides on this issue of celebrity endorsement. The essay opens with a discussion of some of the dangers of accepting medical advice from celebrities, and it points out that these types of celebrity endorsements are not reliable, that they can be very dangerous in influencing people to make decisions about their health and well-being that might be very harmful. Then, on page 21, they talk a little bit about the author's position. In particular, this is the part where they break down Hoffman's research about how people are hardwired to trust celebrities, so that we are actually sort of genetically programmed to do this. And he talks about four different reasons why this is true. The first is economics. That he talks about how celebrity endorsements are ways that we can judge the validity or the relevance of a product. Okay, so when a celebrity endorses a diet, for example, we tend to give that a lot more weight because it's a way that we can judge the quality of the diet if someone we trust or admire actually endorses it. The second thing that the research investigated was something called the halo theory, which is a marketing theory, which basically says that if a celebrity is successful in one area, that makes people sort of assume that they are competent in other areas as well. So for example, if a famous actress, who's a very talented and successful actress, endorses a medical diet, her success as an actress makes us assume that she is also competent in medical areas. So we are likely to trust what she has to recommend. In addition, he talks about classical conditioning, which is a psychological theory that basically says that we have warm feelings towards celebrities. If we have a warm feeling toward a celebrity that we really like, that might cause positive associations with the product, and we might be more likely to buy it. So, for example, if Johnny Depp, one of my favorite actors, endorses a vitamin product, because I have warm feelings toward Johnny Depp, I might have warm feelings toward the vitamin product and be more likely to buy it. And then finally, he talks about neuroscience studies, which basically say that when we see an image of a celebrity, that causes our brains to respond in positive ways, that forms positive associations with the product. So when I see Johnny Depp on the TV screen, my brain fires up with positive responses, which then makes a connection to that product. And when I'm in the store, I might be more likely to buy that product because my brain has those positive associations. So at the end of the essay, where we get to page 22, the author talks about the common ground. Ultimately, what they conclude is that we should rationally be able to avoid celebrity endorsements. We may logically know that they are not valid and that they could even be dangerous. But ultimately, what the science shows is that this influence isn't rational. Celebrity endorsements, for several reasons, actually trigger our emotional response, not our rational response. So the authors talk about three possible solutions. The first is that we need to recognize that celebrity endorsements can be a serious public health challenge, and that we need to inform the public about this health challenge so that people might be